Hey, hello everyone. So happy to see you again. And today we're asking how should we measure innovation? Welcome to Invincible Innovation Live. I'm Mazor Kario, innovation and value creation expert, and I'll be your host. And today with me I have Andreas Larsen. Hey Andreas,
Hey, it's great to be here.
see you. Management consultant and PA consulting. And I'm so happy to talk to you. We've talked in the past and it was so interesting. So we have another opportunity now. And I'm happy that you're here.
I'm sure
And
it'll be a great conversation.
sure. So we are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you are all invited to join the discussion and ask questions. And let's start. How could we measure innovation better?
Yeah, it is a it's a great topic, but also really a challenging topic from my mind. I think many leaders are having trouble with this. How do we actually measure innovation? It quickly becomes very intangible, and thus it's very hard to measure.
Right.
From my point of view, it's important to start not necessarily with the how to measure, because if you don't have the basics right, if you don't start with why to measure, where to actually measure something, what to measure, then it's almost impossible to actually answer how to measure it. So I think it's important to have the basics right first.
Sure. I think that the fact that you're measuring something will give you the possibility to decide on the way better. And because innovation is very complex and hard, and sometimes it takes time, we need a way to know that we are in the right direction. And it depends if we see it only from the financial part or we see it from the way the leaders are acting or from the results of this project or the portfolio itself. So it's really hard to think about it. And I think this is one of the reasons that innovation is so hard and sometimes failing in many companies.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're just on point, because there are many, several at least, different aspects to measure when talking about innovation measurements. And if none are measured, you really need to ensure that you have some other foundations or some other characteristics that really help facilitate innovation, right? That's really key. I mean, measurements won't do it all at all, actually,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
it can help companies to actually frame and succeed with innovation if they are applied right.
So let's say we've done like a few years of innovation. We have a few projects going, and we're doing and training the teams all of the time, and we're on the right direction. How
Mm.
could we measure what we're doing better?
Yeah, I think the first critical thing here to ask oneself, is it the company's way of delivering innovation, meaning the process of creating innovation, that we want to measure, to improve, or is it the innovation initiatives or the projects themselves that we want to measure?
Right,
So that's
right.
that's at least from my mind the first distinction that needs to be made.
So you would divide it into first the process itself of innovation and creation, and maybe more the soft skills of the teams and the way they do what they're doing, which is one thing. And the second one is the results, the projects and how they are going and what are they delivering. Right? Did
Yeah,
I understand?
yeah, exactly. I think that's at least one way of dividing it. There needs to be some way of structure in your thinking around it. And I have experienced that some talk about innovation as the process of creating the innovation, and some talk about it only as the end product or the offering or the solution. So that is at least one way that is quite beneficial to divide it, really to distinguish and to have a focus point. You can easily measure both. Often I would recommend when doing so, that's for sure. But just that
Yeah.
you have this open conversation, so you know what you're talking about.
Right. I feel that maybe measuring the results of a project is much easier than the process. Am I right?
I wouldn't necessarily say so, like from a very general point of view. It really depends on the case, context, complexity, etc. but I think that the metrics that we have available and that's known in the innovation community or in business context in general are perhaps more mature within the measuring the results or measuring projects. And I think that's maybe why that many would say what you're saying as well here. From a personal point of view, I'm not sure whether I disagree or agree. I think it really depends on the context, which one is, so to say, the easiest to measure.
Yeah, could you give us like an example, a use case that one of your clients were like doing innovation, and what kind of measurements they used?
Yeah, I'll provide a use case then from the process point of view or the organizational point of view, how they can measure innovation. It's an example here, and it's an innovation assessment where that we went in and right we took an SS picture of the organization's abilities to actually deliver innovation. So in many other fields, so to say, you also have assessments, and it's the same concept here, where you define the critical elements, where it's, for instance, is within innovation strategy, innovation leadership, the processes, the internal organization, the external collaborations, the capabilities, the learnings, the metrics. So you get this holistic perspective, both in terms of the more softer things, the capabilities, culture, and also the more harder things, meaning the governance, the metrics themselves. And then you really assess how mature is this given company within these different categories. And this really allows some quite interesting discussions among, especially the executives. Now, this was in a scale up slash small medium sized company, but it really allowed some great discussions because based on that picture, where you could really sense that they got an even deeper understanding of their own culture within our culture with focus on innovation, but also on their structure when thinking about innovation. That allows
Yeah,
them to have these discussions for where do we then actually want to go based on their strategic intent. They could actually quite fast see where do we especially need to focus to actually succeed with innovation.
yeah, it's really important to see first where you stand in order to continue from there. What would be like the characteristics, the skills that an innovation leader needs when you measure that, for example?
Can you please reframe? So you say when I measure.
When you measure the leadership itself, what
Yeah.
are the things that you think are crucial to do innovation better? What's the innovation leadership characteristics?
Yeah, which again also it depends a bit from company to company, of course, and from culture
Right.
to culture. But some of the key elements that just that are seen again and again is really that it's a leader that dare to take calculated risk. Of course, not just try everything out and bumps into the uncertainty with all kind of new idea, but really dares to take some risks, uh, also allows the employees to challenge status quo all the time, so that it's actually encouraged to ask all the questions all the time to actually improve both the incremental improvements, but also challenge some of the fundamentals, so that that's seen as being favorable. And then it is really empowering employees to do what they find to be interesting and fun to work with. In my mind,
Right.
that's really where some of the great initiatives often come from.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I think it's really important not only to measure, but to think about how to incentivize the leaders in order to do so. Because you can say, yeah, it's really nice to dare and to think out of the box and do things differently and challenge the status quo. But maybe it's contradictory to what they're really measured as a manager or their departments, how they are measured the success in the departments and so forth. An example that I was gave like a few days ago, As if you want to, let's say, use AI and you really want to use this technology and you want to try it out, sometimes you get incentivized by the number of people underneath you, and AI could replace some of them, and then you're very reluctant to use it, for example. So it's not only seeing like innovation as part of what you're doing, but it's like how you really seeing the organization as a whole, I guess.
Absolutely. I think you are just on point here. Again, it comes back to that having that holistic perspective to innovation, so that you are not just focusing on a few elements, but really having this structured and holistic way of thinking about innovation within your company.
And what would be like the challenges that innovation leaders face today? You know, like we are in the middle of the corona crisis, we have so many challenges. So what would be
Absolutely.
these challenges?
Yeah, as you say, there are so many challenges.
Yeah, many of
Really,
them.
it's very complex to be innovation leader today. It's complex to be any leader today. I think that
Right.
many leaders have learned so much over the past half year, or now, yeah, approaching 9 months or so, um, because there's so much uncertainty. But talking about innovation leaders specifically, I think there are especially two things that pops to my mind, and one being budget. I think when you're in a crisis, regardless of which type of crisis, but if it's something that affects the economy and especially your own company, then there will be, of course, someone that looks into every budget and says, how can we actually ensure that we are using the funds right? So some innovation leaders have experienced that they suddenly have a quite a smaller budget. Others have just had a lot of fights, a lot of political disagreements within the companies for how to allocate the funds, which can be as damaging as actually having the funds removed altogether. So that's really one of the elements that I would say. The second is that the pressure to actually deliver innovation results sooner has increased. So, in other words, your innovation life cycle, so to say, has really shortened, because, or at least that's the pressure that the innovation leaders are facing, that they really are pressured to deliver some results sooner.
Yeah. In general, I think that innovation takes time, and sometimes the stakeholders are not really aware of how long will it take, and and the innovation leaders want to hope that it will take shorter time, and then the promises sometimes are for shorter times, and it's really hard to think as a VC when you're a corporate. It's hard to have this mindset. And I really understand the fact that organizations are rethinking about their budgets. And innovation in many cases is something that is like you putting seeds in the ground, and they are not really flourishing all the time and
Mm,
not as you wanted. So
exactly.
so it really makes sense. On the other side, because everything is changing and you cannot do anything about it. Everything, the market is changing, the economy is changing, the users are changing, the clients, your clients are changing, whatever. Just to postpone it and hope nothing will happen is like a bit like closing your eyes and saying, okay, we'll go back to what we've done. In some cases you will, but in some cases you won't, and we will be ready. And we cannot be ready without really changing. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's like one thing and the other thing on the same time. So one side you're saying, okay, now we're going to focus on our core. On the other side, you're saying, okay, the core might not be as relevant as before. So it's like, you're right. I wouldn't like to be an innovation leader and a leader right now in a corporate. It sounds really tough. It sounds
It's
really tough.
Yeah, it's challenging, but it must also be fun, even though that it's extremely hard, because there is now a great opportunity to actually rethink how you want to focus on some of your innovation. Just when the crisis hit many companies, What my recommendation was to really um, use some of your resources that you had in your innovation hub to help the core business solve some of the critical and urgent problems they had just right away, because they need to have them solved in a matter of weeks. And oftentimes innovation departments have some people uh, with tools, techniques that are used to dealing with great uncertainty. So that can at least be one way of just initially securing or helping to ensure the core business. And then as the uncertainty is reduced, they can like go back and focus on the more long-term strategic innovations. So
Yeah.
that is one way also to ensure that you have the commitment internally in the corporate, because the core business can actually see that you are ready to support them when they are on a burning platform.
Yeah, it really makes sense that you could utilize your capabilities and experience from innovation in order to do other things in the company. And I think that you need to be flexible. If you're not flexible, it's really hard to act within uncertainty. And I think that uncertainty is really inherent in innovation, because you're looking at the future. Nobody knows what will be currently for sure, and
Mm,
you're trying to make estimations and theories and hypotheses and try them out, and as fast as you can to get some of the answers. But you know that you don't know, which is something that is part of innovation, and I think is less part of the core business,
mm,
which you think you know more, or you feel you know more, or you do really know more.
yeah.
And and I
But
think that maybe this is something that is needed from leaders and innovation leaders for sure.
I mean, innovation and uncertainty are just two intertwined things in one way. They are so related that if you don't have uncertainty, then it's hard to have any innovation, because then you know all the facts. And
Right.
that's also why that when dealing with innovation and when dealing with metrics and trying to measure innovation, the greater the uncertainty is, the more you need to have different metrics from those of your core business. Because if you're trying to measure and control your innovation, your horizon 3 innovation, based on the metrics that you use to run your daily business, well, of course, there are some things here that won't go well, because they aren't built to actually help you manage that part of the business. So, what I recommend is that you focus on not trying to measure the outcomes or even the financials, as you are often doing when you are having your core business, but that you shift your mindset to actually focusing on measuring the progress of innovation initiatives, because
Yeah.
then you can really still show some traction, and it's also much easier to have tough discussions with other parts of the company and with the executives, if you're the innovation leader, because you can actually prove through your metrics that you're making progress.
Yeah. I think it's really important to have to see the process, and it's related to a growth mindset. The fact that you see how you're growing and what you're learning on the way, and not only the results, because in innovation you cannot see results in the beginning for sure, and it takes time. And if you're aimed to a very specific results, you cannot really innovate, because you need to grow and learn on the way and do tests and go from there, from each test to each test, and not like this is what we're building, let's build something very strict, like what we had is a waterfall thing, like ta ta ta, and now we're going to get there. So it's another way of thinking, and I think what you're saying about measuring the progress and the way that people are acting in their daily life, in their leadership, it's something which is more, it could be used not only for the innovation department, it's for every leader out there. And it says that there is a progress, although you don't see the numbers all the time, especially it's hard to see numbers when all the economy is going down. So how can you see a number with something which is really young? It's like an internal startup, and like any startup, you need to be like to see it as it is. And in many cases, when you build something which is so young, you're saying, "Oh, I see Ole has a question, and we're going to address him in a few minutes." And and in many cases, when you have something so young, how can you measure it in parallel to a very your core business, which is like many 20 years old? How can you measure what this is doing and this is doing? Like your young innovation projects are still young, and they could go really well, but they cannot really compare in the beginning to what you have in your core, right?
Mm. Yeah,
That makes sense.
absolutely. Yeah, really it does. And I think that the greater the uncertainty is, the more you need to shift this mindset of wanting to measure outcome and really focus on measuring the progress instead. And
Yeah,
what at least I would recommend is really trying to define the critical uncertainties within this project, and based on that define your hypothesis, and then you can start thinking about how you actually then want to experiment or evaluate that, and then you can start to select the metrics. So it's again taking things in the right direction.
right. And I'm going to show you what Ule said, that this is a good point to measure progress when levels of uncertainties are high. We like to talk about KAI, Key Achievement Indicator, versus KPI until uncertainties are reduced. Thanks, Ule, for your comment. Yeah, it really
Yeah,
makes sense.
it really, really does. And it goes back to trying to measure also innovation from different angles. So to say, one way of dividing it was to have some metrics that focus on the corporate side, the innovation culture, and the governance, and having other metrics that focus on the specific projects. Another way of dividing metrics is really to have some metrics that are leading, some that are lacking, and some really that points this picture of the as is right now. So having this mix of metrics is really critical from my point of view, at least.
Yeah. So what do you think that what are like the best tips and practices like change makers and innovation leaders need to know? Like if I would have asked you like give me a few tips, what would that be?
Yeah, it is an excellent question because, of course, it also depends on the company, their maturity level, et cetera, et cetera. But if we're talking about a company that, for instance, hasn't this huge commitment from the executives right now, given the crisis, rather than trying to establish an incubator or set up the 10 innovation metrics that they want to use, or redesign an office space to something innovation fancy, then I would say go do, and then deliver some perhaps more shorter term, but some innovation results that actually proves that you need to have even more budget, and you can actually structure innovation to increase the outcomes that you get, if you just get the so to say the permissions and the buy-in from the executives. So that's one, and that's in the situation where you don't have the level of commitment that you would want from the executives given the crisis at the given moment. If we are talking um, in more general terms, the most important things to focus on for an innovation leader or a change maker, then culture comes to my mind. It's really critical to start there. Don't start with the metrics that we're talking about today. They're really good when you are in the appropriate maturity level where you are trying to have this operating model around your innovation. But if you just have to really get started and focus on one thing, if I only could say one thing, then I would say culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really, really important to have a culture of innovation. But when if you didn't do it, it's like insurance. You need to do innovation all the time, and when the crisis happens, and crisis is only a very big and fast change, but it's still a change. You have the capabilities to do so. And another thing that you mentioned is the buy-in, to get the buy-in from the C-level. It's always important, and you need to do it all the time, but now it's like you need to prove it even more, I guess, in order to do so. So what in order to get more people from the C-level understanding what you're doing and how innovation is important, what could an innovation leader do after all?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. One thing that is really powerful to do, but often extremely hard, is to invite the executive and participate in a project. Of course, not in the full project, but say in 2 days, so that they can really understand through their own hands, so to say, and not just through the PowerPoint presentations, how that the innovation teams are working with this more long-term innovation, to actually see what it means to work with a hypothesis mindset, and work on defining the best way to test that, and based on that, deciding on how to measure it, because it does for many make intuitive sense, but really having your hands into it, and working alongside a team is really, really powerful.
Right, right. I think it's really important in general when people are giving their feedback and not in just in general. This is what we need. If they go into the process and you get there and you do co-creation with them, and they take part with the process, they are more prone to understand it and to be part of it and to agree to what's going on, and not just getting the result in the end. And I think that in general, managers, when they just get the PowerPoint with this and this and this is what we think, and that's it, it's harder for them to relate. In any case, it looks like it's far away from them. And I agree that it's hard because their time is limited and they need to
Indeed.
decide where to place it, right? Um, I think that one of the points that were raised in many of the episodes is the ability for telling the story, and the storytelling capabilities for innovation leaders. How can they really get the buy-in and to sell what they're doing within the corporate and their organization? Which is it's a soft skill, which is very needed in general, I think, for leaders, but for sure for innovation leaders, they want to paint what could the future be, and it's hard. It's hard to do it.
It is really hard, but as you say, it's really important, because you are talking about the future. You are talking about a future that involves great uncertainty. So you cannot, in the same way, go out and visualize your expected deliveries. Perhaps you might not have defined what your expected deliveries are yet, if you're talking on a more strategic innovation level. So in that sense, of course, it is extremely important that you are able to actually paint this picture, and tell the stories in a way that actually makes the right people have the right pictures in their mind, so to say.
Yeah. So maybe the fact that the sea level doesn't have this buy-in, it might be the biggest obstacle maybe for innovation. What did you say is the biggest obstacle? Not currently in crisis. There are no budgets or less budgets, I would say. In general, what would be?
Yeah, I agree that it's really an important one, but I would say that the largest one is culture. I would go back to culture, because you can have executives that don't really support it, and you can still have a culture, and you can have employees that works under the radar and really create some magnificent results. Um, but if you have the executives, on the other hand, that really support and really get the buy-in, there can still be quite some other elements internally in the organizations, if the culture isn't right, that will, so to say, destroy innovation rather than actually facilitate innovation.
Yeah. So it's like both. You need to get the from top down and bottom up in a sense. What
Exactly.
you're So you need
Exactly.
both directions.
and the middle part, so to say. You really need to really have innovation that are booming. You really need to have your entire organization with you on that journey, and that doesn't mean that everyone should be focused on the long-term, more radical innovation. Far from. It means that the right parts of the organization needs to be focusing on the right innovation types, so to say.
Yeah. And as we said, it's a challenge because most people in general, it's not related to the company itself, but most people don't want to change. It's hard for them to change and to do things differently. And in order to do it well, you need to know how to change their mindset and the way they're thinking, which is really hard. Like when you're
It
saying
is.
about the middle level, this is what happens in many cases.
Yeah, and it's important that people want to change and can see that future. And it again goes back to the ability of painting the right pictures, so that it's not something that someone comes and say, now we need a this specific future, which means that you need to do specifically this. It needs to be more motivating to actually have allow the employees to really feel that they can co-create this future alongside with their great colleagues.
Yeah, I think that co-creation is part of what you said about culture, and it's a different way of thinking about your role. Because if you have a definition for your role and for you it's strict, you will not try to do something differently or to try things which is not in your domain. And co-creation means that we're all doing it together. And if I have a skill that I can help you with or am experienced in something, I can contribute to what you're doing, which again demands something which is from the organizational point of view and not from. I myself have more time just to go into another department and share my ideas, which is like really, and in order to create that, you need to change the way the people are thinking about their roles and change their organization to be more flexible and less strict, um, which is something that is maybe connected to the way you think as an individual. Like, are you into like promoting yourself only in the organization, or you see it as a group coming together? um, and I think it's really challenging, right?
And I would say you need to have both, so to say, kinds of people if you're really trying to box people in here. And again, it's about having the right people at the right places, at least from my point of view.
Yeah, I think it's all connected to people and the way they see what they're doing. It's connected to the leaders and the way they see the organization and the future of this organization. And it's related to people who are doing the work from the lower part and what we call bottom up, the way they see how can they create this change and how can they really go about and execute something which is not exactly what they're doing right now. And which is like currently you're doing your job is this and you make money out of this, but you need to think what could more be done. It doesn't mean that you're doing something which is totally different, which is another thing that you could do, but just getting better all the time is something that is very important for companies.
Indeed, and it goes back to this world that it's so uncertainty and there's so much complexity. So of course everyone needs to involve and really increase their capabilities. Some in a more specialist domain, others needs to embrace innovation more. Again, it really depends. But I'd say for the people working within innovation departments, they typically have some quite interesting capabilities around really enjoying this uncertainty and really enjoying to really um, jump onto the train and have some experience with different projects where they really learn some great things that they can take into other projects, even though that they are completely unrelated. They can still make some interesting learnings from the one project to another, and I think
Sure.
that's a great capability to have.
Yeah, in general, to know how to enjoy uncertainty, this is a capability we all need right now in our personal life and in our workplace and everything. So it's a good way to think about what we're doing right now, trying to enjoy uncertainty, I would say. I would like to thank Vivian. Hi, Vivian. Happy to see you again. And I think we're almost done. So if people would like to ask you more and to be in contact with you, where could they reach you?
Yeah, everyone is more than welcome to reach out on LinkedIn. And to my knowledge, I'm the only one, and that's called Andreas N. Larsen. So just feel free to reach out.
Yeah, I'm sure it could be a beginning of a very good connection and something interesting, and maybe we could really enjoy more the uncertainty that we have right now. This is what we could wish for ourselves for today. So thank you very much, Andres. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Absolutely, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, and thank you all of the change makers out there joining us and joining us next time. Have a great day. Bye bye.